He had been staring at the computer screen for hours, eyes strained and body tense. Another long week at the office had left him drained. Deadlines, meetings, emails piling up, and the constant pressure to perform had taken their toll. The kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones and makes you feel as though you are carrying the weight of the entire world. He knew he needed a break, a real break, somewhere he could forget about everything for a while. So that evening, after leaving the office, he decided to go to the gym. Not for the treadmill or lifting weights, which he rarely had the energy for these days, but for the sauna. Just the thought of a quiet, hot, steamy room where he could sit in silence, sweat out stress, and let his mind wander was enough to bring a small smile to his face. The gym was nearly empty at this hour, which made the plan even more appealing. He could almost taste the relief before he even stepped inside. The gym had a familiar smell, a mix of disinfectant, rubber mats, and faint traces of sweat. It didn't bother him. Instead, it felt oddly comforting, like the scent of a place that knew his routine. He walked past the reception, nodded at the front desk staff, and made his way to the changing rooms. He changed quickly, tossing his clothes into a locker and grabbing a towel. Each step felt lighter than the one before, as if he was shedding. Not just his jacket and shoes, but also the weight of the day. When he pushed open the door to the sauna, warm air hit him immediately. The heat was intense, enveloping his body in a thick, comforting hug. The wood beneath his feet felt slightly warm and smooth, and the smell of cedar filled his lungs. He took a deep breath, letting the heat seep into his muscles. He found a spot on the top bench, the hottest part of the sauna, and sat down. The steam rose in waves around him, curling like clouds and wrapping him in a private little world. For a few moments, he simply sat there, closing his eyes and listening to the quiet. There were occasional creaks from the wood, the faint hiss of water hitting hot stones, and the rhythmic sound of his own breathing. The world outside, office, the emails, the constant demands, seemed impossibly far away. For the first time in days, maybe even weeks, he felt a sense of peace. He could feel the stress melting from his shoulders, his back loosening, and the tightness in his chest easing just a little. He leaned back, eyes still closed, and thought about the week he had just survived. It had been brutal. Endless meetings with little resolution, colleagues arguing over trivial matters, and a pile of work that seemed to grow faster than he could manage. He'd been up late more nights than he could count, sometimes skipping meals just to get everything done. And still, he knew the work wouldn't slow down next week. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. Here, he could just breathe. He thought about his coworkers, the ones he laughed with, the ones he competed with, and the ones he barely noticed. Work was complicated, relationships complicated, and sometimes it felt like he was walking a tightrope just to keep everything balanced. But right now, he didn't have to think about that. Right now, he only had to think about the heat, the steam, and the slow exhale of tension from his body. As he closed his eyes further and let the warmth settle in, he thought about how rare moments like this were. Life had a way of keeping him busy, moving from one task to another, rarely giving him a moment to pause. He thought about the people in his life outside of work, his friends and family, and how little time he had spent with them recently. Maybe it was time to reconnect, to step away from the constant cycle of work for a while. But he pushed the thought aside for now. The sauna was his sanctuary, and he didn't want to think about responsibilities just yet. He tilted his head back, resting it against the warm wooden wall, and let the sweat begin to run down his forehead and neck. It was a cleansing feeling, as though each bead of sweat was carrying away a piece of stress, a small fragment of worry. The heat made his muscles loosen, his thoughts slow down, and his mind drift. He found himself thinking about simple things, how good a cool shower would feel afterward, how nice it would be to lie down later and rest completely. Nothing complicated, nothing stressful. Time passed slowly. He didn't check the clock, didn't worry about how long he had been there. Minutes blended into one another, and the outside world became a distant memory. He felt lighter, more at ease, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel completely free. Just him, the heat, and the steam. He could hear the occasional drip of water on the sauna stones, a tiny hiss as it evaporated into steam. It was rhythmic, soothing, and oddly hypnotic. He felt his eyelids grow heavier, his thoughts wandering in a lazy, peaceful way. It was rare to have a moment so uninterrupted, so free from expectation. Here, he didn't have to perform, didn't have to meet deadlines, didn't have to respond to anyone, could just exist. As he sat there, he thought about how important it was to take care of himself. He had been so focused on work, on meeting others' expectations, that he had neglected his own well-being. This sauna, this simple act of stepping away, was a small but meaningful way of caring for himself. He made a mental note to do it more. Often, to not wait until exhaustion forced him to seek refuge. The warmth began to penetrate deeper into his body, and he felt a strange, comforting fatigue settle over him. His shoulders sagged, his arms rested loosely at his sides, and he could feel his heartbeat slowing, his breathing deepening. It was the kind of relaxation that comes from both physical comfort and mental release. A rare combination that made him feel renewed, even in small ways. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a life without constant stress. He pictured himself enjoying simple pleasures, spending time with loved ones, laughing without worry, sleeping deeply at night. These thoughts made him smile faintly, a small warmth inside to match the heat around him. He realized that these little escapes were not luxuries but necessities. Moments that allowed him to recharge and face the world again. He opened his eyes slowly, letting them adjust to the thick, swirling steam. The room was empty, as he had expected. He felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet triumph in finding a space where he could be alone with his thoughts. For a moment he felt as though he had discovered a secret, a hidden retreat where the world could not reach him. The sauna had become more than just a place to sweat. It was a sanctuary, a place of solitude and reflection. He leaned forward slightly, placing his elbows on his knees, and let the steam envelop him completely. He could feel the tension dissolving from his body, muscles loosening, and a sense of calm spreading through him. He thought about how rare these moments were and how easily they could be disrupted. The idea of stepping back into the world after this, with its endless responsibilities and pressures, felt daunting. But for now, it didn't matter. The sauna was his world, and nothing else existed here. As he closed his eyes again, he let his mind wander freely. Memories of childhood, dreams for the future, fleeting thoughts about people he cared about, they all drifted through his mind like clouds. None of them carried weight here, none of them demanded action. He was simply present, feeling the heat on his skin, the sweat on his brow, and the slow, steady rhythm of his own breathing. He knew he could stay here longer, but part of him also wondered how long it would be before someone else arrived. The gym was not always empty, and the sauna was a popular spot, especially in the evenings. But he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the present moment. This was his time, his peace, his solitude, the warmth, the quiet. The thick embrace of the steam it all combined to create a cocoon, a small world entirely his own. And as he sat there, letting the heat and stillness fill him, he realized how much he had missed this simple human need. The need to just be, without expectation, without pressure, without interruption. It was a moment to reclaim himself, if only for a short while, and he savored it fully, letting every breath, every drop of sweat, every slow heartbeat remind him of the simple power of being alone and at peace. He had just started to sink deeper into the warmth of the sauna when he thought he heard something, a soft, almost imperceptible sound from the far corner of the room. At first he dismissed it. It could have been the wood expanding in the heat or the faint hiss of steam curling from the rocks. He told himself it was nothing, that he was imagining it. After all, he had expected to be alone. That was the whole reason he had come here, to find quiet and solitude. But then the sound came again, a slight shuffle, a soft step against the wooden floor. He opened his eyes and blinked through the thick rising steam, trying to see if anyone had entered. At first, the haze made it impossible to distinguish shapes clearly. Shadows danced in the warm fog, and the room seemed to shift as the steam thickened and swirled around him. For a moment, he considered leaving, but something made him pause. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps a hope that it was just another gym-goer who wouldn't notice him. Slowly, a figure began to emerge through the dense steam. At first, it was just a vague silhouette, a dark outline that moved hesitantly. His heart started to beat a little faster. There was something familiar about the way the figure stood, the posture, the way the arms hung loosely. He squinted, trying to make sense of the shadow in front of him. And then it hit him. The shape, the presence, the very energy of the person was unmistakable. It was his boss. For a moment, he froze, unsure of what to do. Should he acknowledge it? Pretend he hadn't seen? Or quietly slip out and retreat to the shower, pretending nothing had happened? None of these options seemed simple or safe. His mind raced, and a wave of panic surged through him. What if his boss judged him for being there, for taking time to relax when there was work waiting? What if this casual moment turned awkward, or worse, became a story told back at the office? The figure moved closer and the steam parted slightly, revealing more. He could make out the familiar features. The same calm expression that seemed to command respect in meetings, but now softened in this strange, quiet space. His boss looked relaxed, a rare sight in itself. It carried an air of casualness that was completely different from the professional demeanor he displayed at work. It was disarming, almost comforting, yet still nerve-wracking. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that this was just a human being, someone who also needed moments of peace. Yet, the situation felt anything but ordinary. It was a private, intimate space, and suddenly, the boundaries of work and personal life felt blurred. The heat of the sauna seemed to intensify his anxiety, each drop of sweat mirroring the nervous energy rising in his chest. His boss acknowledged him with a small nod, a gesture so casual it almost seemed like a greeting between friends. That tiny nod, however, did little to calm the storm of thoughts in his head. He returned the gesture cautiously, unsure if it was appropriate to speak or remain silent. Silence felt safer, but it was thick and heavy, filled with unspoken questions and the awareness that both of them were fully present. Yet equally cautious, minutes passed, with neither of them moving or speaking much. He could hear the faint hiss of the water against the stones, the creak of the wooden benches, and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. He tried to focus on these simple, grounding sounds, attempting to regain a sense of normalcy. But the surrealness of the moment kept pulling him back into anxiety. How could he have imagined ever having this encounter? And yet, there it was, happening. The presence of his boss, so unexpectedly human and real in this steamy sanctuary, made him reconsider everything he had thought about authority and professionalism. Here, stripped of the formal trappings of the office, his boss was just another person seeking relief from the pressures of life. Yet the awareness of who this person was, of the hierarchy, the power, the professional expectations, made every movement and thought feel amplified. Like the quiet room had become charged with tension. He tried to focus on the heat again, to let it envelop him and dissolve the nerves, but it was difficult. His mind kept wandering back to work, 2 unfinished tasks, 2 deadlines looming in his inbox. But then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to notice a different rhythm. His boss shifted slightly, settling onto the bench, and the tension in the room eased a little. The initial shock, the surge of panic, began to give way to curiosity and, oddly, a sense of camaraderie. They were both here for the same reason: to escape, to breathe, to exist for a moment without the weight of responsibility pressing down. Thought crossed his mind. Maybe this was an opportunity. Not to impress or to maneuver, but simply to see someone he respected in a new light. A side that was rarely visible, a glimpse into the humanity behind the professional facade. The idea made him feel slightly more at ease, a little braver. Perhaps, in this unusual encounter, there was something to be learned. Something to understand beyond the formalities and expectations of the office. He took a slow breath, letting the hot, humid air fill his lungs, and tried to steady his racing thoughts. The steam continued to swirl, wrapping around them both like a veil that offered both concealment and intimacy. The room felt smaller, warmer, and yet somehow safer. In the midst of the tension, there was a strange comfort in sharing this private space, even silently. There was no need for words yet, no need for explanations, just the simple acknowledgement of presence. He noticed details he had never seen before. The way his boss's hair clung slightly to the forehead from the heat, the relaxed set of his shoulders, the small, almost imperceptible shift of weight from one foot to the other. These small human details, trivial in another context, now felt monumental. They made him realize how little he truly knew about the people he worked with, how the office only showed fragments of reality, and how much life existed beyond the walls of work. He also began to reflect on himself. His initial panic, his fear of judgment, his concern about being perceived as unprofessional, all of it seemed both real and yet suddenly petty. In the heat and steam of the sauna, life's hierarchy seemed less rigid, less important. He was reminded that everyone, regardless of status or authority, faced stress, exhaustion, and the need for moments of quiet reprieve. Still, the awareness of who was sitting across from him kept him cautious. He remained seated, letting the heat seep into his muscles, feeling the warmth relax his body while his mind carefully balanced observation and reflection. Each shift in posture, each subtle sound, carried more meaning than it would have with a stranger. Yet, he realized that this heightened awareness could be a gift, offering insight not just into his boss, but into the human experience of stress, vulnerability, and the pursuit of calm. As minutes stretched into what felt like hours, he started to notice subtle interactions. His boss adjusted his towel, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, and seemed to exhale deeply, a sound of relief more than of exhaustion. It was a small, human sound, and for the first time, the protagonist felt a sense of shared humanity. They were not employee and employer in this moment. They were two people seeking a pause from life's pressures. The realization brought a surprising mix of relief and curiosity. He wanted to say something, to acknowledge the strangeness of the encounter, but words felt inadequate, almost intrusive. Instead, he focused on the sensation of the heat, the curling steam, and the quiet presence of another person who, like him, had chosen this moment of solitude. The silence became less intimidating and more of a shared experience. A private understanding that needed no explanation. He started to feel more grounded, more centered, as he accepted the presence of his boss without fear or expectation. The initial tension, which had felt almost unbearable, began to fade into a sense of calm awareness. He realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could bring clarity, perspective, and even a quiet sense of connection. And here in the warm, steamy room, he was learning that lesson in real time. Without lectures, without agendas, just through shared space and silent acknowledgement, he let his mind drift again. Now less anxious and more reflective. He thought about the week ahead, but without dread, thinking instead of how he could carry this small insight into his daily life. Perhaps the boss he had feared, the person he had assumed always judged and watched, was more complex, more human, more relatable than he had imagined. Perhaps he, too, could show vulnerability, recognize humanity, and find small moments of connection that made life richer and more bearable. The room remained quiet, the steam swirling around them, the heat pressing against their skin, the air thick with moisture and subtle understanding. He could feel the tension in his body melting away, replaced by a sense of calm curiosity. He realized that this encounter, unexpected as it was, might be a turning point, a moment that would stay with him long after the sauna was empty. He was beginning to see his boss not just as a figure of authority, but as another human being navigating the same challenges, seeking the same moments of respite as he sat there. He let the steam fill his lungs and the warmth fill his muscles. Appreciating the strange, intimate calm of the moment, he didn't yet know how the conversation would unfold, or if there would even be words at all. For now, simply acknowledging the presence of another person, someone so significant in his daily life, and feeling the shared humanity in that silent encounter was enough. And in that steamy, quiet room, He began to understand that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most unexpected places. Without fanfare, without pretense. Just through the simple act of being present together. The warmth of the sauna wrapped around him like a blanket, heavy but comforting as he and his boss sat in silence, each aware of the other's presence. The air was thick with steam, making the edges of the room blur and fade into a haze. Every small movement seemed louder than it would normally be. Every sound amplified, every sigh of breath resonating against the wooden walls. He tried to focus on the heat, on the soothing sensation of the warmth against his skin. But his mind kept drifting back to the figure across from him. The initial shock had faded slightly, replaced by a complex mixture of curiosity and cautious respect. He noticed how his boss shifted slightly on the bench. The towel clutched loosely around the waist, muscles relaxing visibly with each slow breath. For the first time, he saw a side of this person that went beyond the office, beyond deadlines, beyond meetings and authority. He looked human, fatigued yet calm, seeking the same peace that he had been chasing all evening. The silence stretched, neither wanting to break it too soon. It was an unusual silence, heavy but not oppressive, filled with the quiet hum of understanding that they were sharing this small, intimate space. The protagonist's mind raced with thoughts of what to say, what not to say, and whether words were even necessary. Here, in the sauna, the usual hierarchy seemed almost irrelevant, replaced by the simple fact that they were both there to breathe, to relax, to escape. Finally, his boss shifted slightly, clearing his throat just enough to signal acknowledgement without intruding. The protagonist took a deep breath, letting the hot, moist air fill his lungs, and tried to match the calmness he observed. He responded with a small nod, cautious but genuine. It felt like the most natural way to begin communication, a gesture that bridged the gap between surprise and conversation without words, encouraged by the subtle interaction. He decided to speak, testing the waters with a simple comment about the heat. "It's hotter than I expected tonight," he said, keeping his tone light. The words felt awkward at first, like stepping onto a tightrope. But they broke the tension enough for his boss to respond. "Yes, it's intense," his boss replied with a slight smile. There was no judgment, no authority in the voice, just a simple observation shared between two people. That small smile changed everything, softening the air, making the situation feel less intimidating and more human. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position to face a little more toward the other bench. "I come here to relax after long weeks. Helps clear my mind," he admitted. The words felt honest, unpolished, and strangely relieving. There was no need to impress, no need to explain or justify, just a simple truth. His boss nodded thoughtfully, and the acknowledgement alone felt significant. "I understand that," his boss said. "Sometimes it's the only way to step away from everything and just breathe." The tone was calm, reflective, almost confessional. The protagonist felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. Here was someone he had always seen as distant, structured, and authoritative, yet now sharing a truth that was universally human. The walls that existed in the office seemed to dissolve, replaced by a sense of quiet connection. They both leaned back slightly, allowing the heat to seep deeper into their muscles. The protagonist felt his body loosen, tension leaving in long, steady waves. The shared silence now felt comfortable, like a bridge between them. And he noticed how rare and precious these moments of unguarded interaction were. In this small, steamy room, the world outside, the work, the deadlines, the expectations no longer mattered. He ventured further, feeling emboldened by the gentle tone of the conversation. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said, "how little we see of each other outside work. We know each other by tasks and emails, not by moments like this." His boss looked thoughtful, letting the words linger before responding. "Yes, it's easy to forget that everyone has their own life, their own stress, and their own ways of dealing with it. The office is just one part of who we are. Moments like this, they remind us of that." There was a quiet sincerity in the voice that surprised him. It was not the polished, measured tone of meetings or presentations. It was candid, human, and unexpectedly reassuring. He felt a new sense of openness, a rare vulnerability, and decided to take a step further. Sometimes I feel like I'm just running from one deadline to another without really stopping to breathe. Moments like this make me realize how much I miss just existing, without worry. His boss nodded slowly. I know exactly what you mean. I used to think that showing any sign of struggle at work was a weakness, but it's not. Everyone has their own limits, and taking time to recharge is necessary, not optional. The words carried weight not as a lecture but as shared wisdom. The protagonist felt a flicker of relief. He wasn't alone in feeling overwhelmed. His boss, someone who often seemed untouchable and infallible, experienced the same human challenges. They continued talking cautiously at first, then with increasing ease. Topics shifted naturally, from work pressures to favorite ways to unwind to small, personal anecdotes that revealed the side of his boss rarely seen in the office. He learned that his boss had been under immense pressure as well, managing responsibilities, personal obligations, and the constant need to appear in control. The conversation, unplanned and unstructured, became an unexpected mentoring moment, offering insight and perspective that no formal training or meeting could provide. The heat of the sauna was no longer a distraction. It was part of the intimacy, a shared challenge that created a quiet bond. Sweat dripped down their skin, muscles loosened, and the steam continued to swirl. It's almost like a protective veil, allowing the conversation to unfold in a way that felt safe and private. He noticed that laughter began to emerge, small chuckles at shared experiences, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating in this context. With each passing minute, the protagonist's initial fear and awkwardness faded. The walls of formality and hierarchy, so rigid at the office, had melted away. He realized that understanding someone's humanity, or struggles and ways of coping, could shift perspective in profound ways. This encounter, which had begun as a moment of panic and embarrassment, was now transforming into a lesson in empathy and connection. He felt the heat pressing into his muscles, loosening knots of tension, while the words exchanged loosened the knots of anxiety in his mind. It was a rare combination, the physical and emotional release merging seamlessly. In this small, steamy room, he discovered that hierarchy, authority, and fear were temporary constructs. It's overshadowed by the simple reality that everyone needed moments of reprieve and understanding. As the conversation progressed, they spoke about the future personal goals, small dreams and ideas that had little to do with work. The boss shared a few personal challenges, speaking candidly about times when decisions had been difficult. Mistakes had been made, and lessons had been learned. The protagonist listened intently, absorbing the wisdom without judgment, recognizing the shared human experience that bound them. Together beyond their professional roles, the heat continued to envelop them, the steam curling around their bodies, the quiet hum of the sauna creating a private rhythm. He noticed the subtle gestures, the shift of weight, the way his boss's hands rested lightly on the bench, the relaxation that came from shared understanding. These small details, invisible in the office, now seemed monumental, revealing a depth to the person he had only seen in one dimension before. In the midst of this unexpected conversation, he felt a strange sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the coincidence, for the unusual timing, and for the opportunity to see someone he respected in a new light. The sauna, once just a place to sweat and unwind, had become a space for connection, reflection, and unexpected insight. He realized that these moments, though fleeting, could have a lasting impact on perception, attitude, understanding. The conversation began to wind down naturally as the heat and the quiet demanded pause. They leaned back once more, letting the silence settle around them, comfortable and easy. He felt lighter, not just physically from the heat and sweat, but emotionally and mentally, having shared a rare, authentic moment. The initial panic, the fear of judgment, the awkwardness, all of it had transformed into awareness, connection, and a quiet sense of reassurance. As they sat there, the protagonist reflected on the power of human connection, even in the most unexpected and unlikely of places. The boss, once a figure of authority and distance, had revealed a human side, showing vulnerability, wisdom, and the shared need for respite. He understood more clearly than ever that people were complex, multidimensional, incapable of empathy and understanding beyond what daily interactions often reveal. He felt a sense of calm settle over him, a rare feeling that came from both physical and emotional release. The heat, the steam, and the conversation had combined to create a moment of clarity, insight, and connection that he knew would stay with him. It was a moment he could carry back into the office, into his life, and into future interactions, an encounter that reminded him that even authority figures were human, that moments of vulnerability were shared experiences, and that understanding often comes in quiet, unexpected ways. As the steam continued to swirl around them and the warmth penetrated deeper into his muscles, he allowed himself one last deep breath, feeling the relaxation settle fully into his body. He looked at his boss, who met his gaze with a small, knowing smile, and realized that this shared experience, brief as it was, had changed something fundamental. Not about work, not about authority, but about perception, empathy, and the quiet understanding that connected them as human beings. The heat of the sauna was intense, but it no longer felt uncomfortable. It was as if the warmth had transformed into a kind of protective cocoon, holding them in a quiet space separate from the rest of the world. The steam swirled around them, thick and curling, masking the boundaries of the room and giving the encounter a sense of intimacy and safety. The protagonist leaned back, feeling the sweat running down his face and body, and noticed the subtle, relaxed posture of his boss across the bench. This was not the commanding presence from meetings and office corridors, but a human being, vulnerable yet composed, sharing a private moment. He cleared his throat softly, hesitant but compelled to speak. "I never thought I'd see you here like this," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. The words were light, conversational, yet they carried a weight he didn't fully understand. It was a statement of surprise, of acknowledgement, but also of human curiosity. His boss chuckled softly, a warm, unguarded sound that seemed to fill the room. "I suppose it's unusual," he admitted, leaning back with a relaxed sigh. "Most people don't think of their bosses as needing the same moments of quiet, but we all do. Stress doesn't discriminate." There was no pretense in the words, no hierarchy, just an honest acknowledgement of human experience. The protagonist nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. The tension that had gripped him at the moment of recognition was fading, replaced by curiosity and empathy. He realized that the person he had always seen as authoritative, somewhat unapproachable, it was not just human, but someone with vulnerabilities, challenges, and ways of coping that mirrored his own. "I guess it's easy to forget that everyone has struggles," he said quietly, letting the words hang in the warm, humid air. "We see people through their roles, not as people living their own lives outside of work." His boss nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. There's a lot you don't see behind the office doors. The stress, the mistakes, the long nights trying to get everything right, it's a part of life for everyone. Even those who seem like they have it all together." His gaze met the protagonist's, steady and sincere. The words were simple, but they carried an honesty that resonated deeply. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the soft hiss of water on the sauna stones, the subtle creak of the wooden benches, and the slow, measured rhythm of their own breathing. The room felt removed from the pressures of daily life, a place where conversation could unfold naturally, where hierarchy could be set aside and where human connection could grow quietly. Almost imperceptibly, the protagonist shifted slightly, feeling the warmth seep deeper into his muscles, loosening the knots of tension he had carried for days. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just running in circles," he admitted. "Deadlines, emails, meetings, it's like a treadmill that never stops. I come here to escape, even if just for a little while." His boss leaned forward slightly, resting an elbow on a knee, a gesture of shared understanding. "I know the feeling. I've been there more times than I can count." It's easy to forget that taking a moment for yourself isn't weakness. It's necessary. It allows you to step back, see things more clearly, and handle challenges with perspective. The quiet moments, the simple breaks, they're not luxuries. They're survival tools. The protagonist listened intently, absorbing the words, feeling the weight of them sink in. It was rare to hear such candid acknowledgement from someone in authority, and yet here in the heat and steam, the words felt natural, unforced, and profoundly human. He realized that the office, with its rigid structures and expectations, rarely allowed these truths to surface. Here the conversation flowed without constraint, unbound by rank or responsibility. Encouraged, he spoke again, a little more freely. "I think I've always worried about showing any sign of struggle at work. Even small mistakes feel magnified when you're being watched." His boss nodded, a small, knowing smile playing at the edges of his lips. "I felt the same way. And yet, mistakes are where the lessons live. Pressure is constant, but growth comes from acknowledging limitations and learning from them. It's okay to be human. In fact, it's essential." There was a quiet authority in the words, not demanding obedience, but offering understanding. It was a perspective rarely shared in meetings or memos. It struck him deeply. The protagonist shifted, feeling his own tension ease further. He realized that this moment was teaching him something important, not about work, but about life, about connection, vulnerability, and understanding, about seeing beyond appearances and appreciating the humanity in others, even those in positions of authority. As the conversation continued, they shared small anecdotes, stories of past challenges, moments of uncertainty, and times when perseverance had been tested. His boss spoke openly about early mistakes, about lessons learned the hard way, about the constant balancing act of responsibilities. The protagonist listened, feeling a sense of kinship grow, a bridge forming between them that went beyond titles and office politics. The sauna heat pressed into their skin, the steam curling around them, yet the room felt lighter, filled with quiet understanding. Each shared word, each acknowledgement of struggle and resilience, seemed to dissolve the invisible barriers that had existed between them. They were no longer boss and employee, authority and subordinate. They were simply two people, sharing a space, a moment, and an insight into the human condition. He felt emboldened to reflect on his own experiences, the constant pressure he had felt, and the rare moments of relief that had seemed so fleeting. "I think I forget that everyone has their own ways of dealing with stress," he admitted. "I see the confidence, the calmness, and I assume it's effortless. But I can see now that it's not." His boss nodded again thoughtfully. "It's never effortless. Everyone has challenges, insecurities, and moments of doubt. The difference is how we navigate them. Some of us hide it better than others. Some of us share it in quiet ways. The important thing is to recognize it, not just in yourself, but in others as well." The protagonist felt a profound sense of insight. For the first time, he could see his boss not as an unreachable figure, but as someone navigating life in a way that was relatable and human. The warmth of the sauna, the swirling steam, and the shared space had facilitated a rare glimpse into vulnerability and understanding. It was an experience that was both humbling and enlightening. Minutes passed, the conversation flowing naturally, ebbing and pausing, filled with thoughtful reflections and quiet laughter. They discussed not only the pressures of work, but the small joys and comforts that kept them going, the simple rituals, the fleeting moments of peace, the personal victories that often went unnoticed. The discussion had moved from professional boundaries to human realities, from the office hierarchy to personal understanding. He realized that this encounter was changing his perception, not just of his boss, but of himself. Seeing someone he respected in a moment of honesty and vulnerability allowed him to reconsider his own fears and assumptions. The walls of anxiety and expectation that he had carried into the sauna were slowly dissolving, replaced by clarity, empathy, and an appreciation for the shared human experience. The conversation began to wind down, naturally giving way to a comfortable silence. The warmth of the sauna continued to embrace them, steam swirling in gentle patterns, and the quiet was no longer tense but soothing. He felt lighter, not just physically from the heat and sweat, but emotionally and mentally From the openness and insight that had unfolded, he looked at his boss, who met his gaze with a calm, understanding expression. There was no judgment, no expectation, only acknowledgement and shared understanding. In that moment, he realized that this encounter, brief as it was, had revealed something profound, that human connection and empathy could transcend formal roles and hierarchies, that understanding and compassion could flourish in unexpected places. As he leaned back, letting the heat and steam continue to penetrate his muscles, he felt a renewed sense of perspective. The pressures of work, while still present, seemed more manageable, more human, and less intimidating. The encounter had shifted something inside him, offering insight, reassurance, and a rare sense of shared humanity that would stay with him long after the sauna was empty. He allowed himself one final deep breath, feeling the warmth fill his lungs, the sweat flow down his body, and the calm settle in his mind. The moment had been more than he had expected. A revelation not of secrets or confessions, but of quiet truth, that vulnerability, empathy, and human connection could appear in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the people we see only in professional roles are far more relatable and human than we imagine. In the steamy, quiet room, he had discovered not only a new understanding of his boss, but also a deeper understanding of himself and the importance of taking moments to truly breathe, reflect, and connect, as the heat of the sauna continued to surround them. The conversation naturally slowed. The thick steam seemed to cocoon the two of them, softening the edges of the world outside and making the space feel private, safe, and almost timeless. Both of them leaned back slightly, the tension of the earlier moments replaced by a quiet ease. It was remarkable how quickly the atmosphere had shifted from surprise and anxiety to reflection and understanding. The protagonist felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a combination of physical relaxation and emotional clarity. He realized that this encounter had given him a perspective he hadn't expected. Seeing his boss in a moment of vulnerability, observing the human side of someone he usually saw only as an authority figure, had changed something inside him. Work still existed, responsibility still loomed, but they felt smaller, more manageable. The hierarchy that had once seemed so rigid now appeared less intimidating, less absolute. He understood that even those who led and directed others faced pressures and challenges that were unseen. The boss adjusted slightly on the bench, letting the towel fall loosely around the waist, and glanced around the room. The gaze was calm, almost reflective. "It's rare to find time like this," he said softly. "To step away from the constant noise, the expectations, the responsibilities. Most people don't even consider it. But it's important, even necessary. These moments allow you to recharge, to see clearly, and to face challenges with a steadier mind." The protagonist nodded slowly, feeling a resonance in the words. He realized that he often pushed himself too hard, assuming that breaks were a luxury rather than a need. Here, in this quiet room, with heat pressing against his skin and steam curling around them, he understood the value of slowing down, of giving himself permission to simply exist, unburdened by expectations. "I used to think taking time for myself was selfish," he admitted, voice low. "Like I was shirking responsibility, but I see now that it's actually essential. Otherwise, everything just piles up and gets worse." His boss smiled faintly, a warm, knowing expression. "Exactly. It's not about avoiding work or responsibility. It's about sustaining yourself so you can handle them better. You can't pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's survival." They sat quietly for a while longer, listening to the hiss of water on the sauna stones, the soft creak of the wood beneath them, and the rhythm of their own breathing. The air was thick and warm, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like a shared blanket of understanding, a cocoon where human experience could be acknowledged and reflected. Upon without judgment, the protagonist thought about the office, the deadlines, the constant emails, and the meetings that had seemed so overwhelming. All of it existed, still waiting for him outside, but the pressure felt lighter. Not gone, but reframed. He had seen someone he respected navigate stress, uncertainty, and pressure while still finding moments of clarity and peace. It was a lesson more valuable than any training session, more impactful than any performance review. You know, he said finally, breaking the silence, I think I've been underestimating how much we all carry inside. I only see the surface at work, and it's easy to assume that everyone else has it together. But everyone struggles. Everyone has moments of doubt. It's comforting to realize that. His boss nodded, eyes thoughtful. It's true. Life is complex, and we all carry burdens. But acknowledging them, even in small ways, helps us manage better. Sharing moments like this, even silently, reminds us that we are not alone. The words settled in his mind, sinking deep, and he felt a quiet gratitude, not just for the encounter itself, but for the realization that connection, empathy, understanding could emerge in unexpected ways in unlikely places. The sauna had become more than a room of heat and steam. It had become a space of insight, reflection, and unexpected human connection. He let his gaze wander to the ceiling, to the steam curling in soft patterns above them, and reflected on how rarely he had experienced moments of such unguarded clarity. The office had rules, expectations, and appearances to maintain. Here, those constraints had fallen away. He had witnessed vulnerability, shared thoughts, and human truths that were rarely spoken aloud in professional settings. The experience was both humbling and empowering. I think this is one of the most valuable conversations I've had in a long time, he said quietly, a little in awe. Not about work specifically, but about understanding, perspective, and seeing things clearly. His boss gave a small, satisfied nod. Sometimes the most important lessons come outside the office. When we least expect it, moments like this can shift the way we see ourselves and others. It's about perspective, and perspective comes from reflection and shared experience. The protagonist felt a warmth that went beyond the heat of the sauna, a sense of human connection that was profound and rare. He realized that he had been given a glimpse into a side of his boss that was usually hidden, and that this glimpse had changed his perception. Authority and professionalism had not disappeared, but they had been humanized, made relatable and approachable. The lessons of empathy, understanding, shared vulnerability were clearer than ever. Time seemed to move slowly, unmeasured, as they sat in quiet reflection. The world outside, with its noise, pressures, and responsibilities, felt paused. It was as if the sauna had become a temporal refuge, a space where the weight of expectations could be lifted and replaced with clarity and calm. He allowed himself to soak in the sensation, both physically and mentally, letting the heat, steam, and shared presence settle into his being. He thought about how he would carry this experience back into his daily life, not as a story to tell, but as an internal shift in understanding. He would approach work, colleagues, and challenges with a new perspective, a recognition of shared humanity and vulnerability. The encounter had revealed that even those in authority were navigating life's pressures, making decisions and coping in their own ways. It was a lesson in humility, perspective, and empathy. Finally, they both rose from the benches, feeling the sweat slick against their skin and the warmth continuing to linger. The air felt thick, but cleansing, a final embrace of the quiet, reflective energy that had developed in the room. As they reached for towels, the protagonist felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected encounter. What had begun as surprise and tension had transformed into insight, understanding, and a subtle bond formed through shared humanity. Walking toward the shower, he felt lighter, more centered, and oddly optimistic. The pressures of work still awaited him, but they no longer carried the same weight. He understood that moments of clarity, connection, and perspective were available, even in brief encounters in unexpected spaces. He had learned something valuable about himself, his boss, and the importance of taking time to pause, breathe, and reflect. He glanced back at his boss, who gave a slight nod, acknowledging the shared experience without words. The gesture was simple but powerful, a silent recognition of the insight and connection that had emerged in the steamy, quiet room. It was a final moment of understanding before they both returned to the world outside, carrying the lessons with them in the locker room. As he dressed, he reflected on the evening. The sauna had been more than a place to unwind. It had been a space for revelation and human connection. He realized that sometimes the most profound experiences come from moments that are unplanned, quiet, and seemingly ordinary. And sometimes the people we think we know in one dimension reveal entirely new sides of themselves in the simplest of circumstances. Stepping out into the cool evening air, he felt the contrast sharply, the warmth behind him, the chill outside. It was refreshing, almost exhilarating, and he carried with him the calm and clarity from the sauna. He knew that the encounter had shifted his perception, not just of his boss, but of the world around him. Human connection, understanding, and empathy were everywhere, waiting to be recognized. Even in unexpected places, he walked toward his car with a lighter step, a subtle smile on his face. The evening had begun as a simple attempt to find respite, but it had ended as a lesson in perspective, insight, and connection. He understood now that moments of revelation could appear anywhere, even in the thick heat of a sauna, and that sometimes the people we see only in professional roles are far more relatable, compassionate, and human than we ever imagine. As he drove home, the warmth of the sauna lingered inside him, a reminder of the quiet truths discovered, the shared humanity acknowledged, and the simple yet profound lesson that taking time to breathe, reflect, and connect could change the way we see ourselves and others. Life was still demanding, still fast-paced, still full of challenges, but now he felt equipped with a new perspective, one shaped not by fear or hierarchy, but by understanding, empathy, and the unexpected moments that remind us of our shared humanity.